ever get stuck trying to explain software testing to, like, everyone on your team?
You mean making sure everyone from the coders to the CEO understands what's actually being tested?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
Huge challenge. But that's where I think Cucumber and TestNG come in, right?
They both tackle that, but in totally different ways.
Okay, so first, just to get us all on the same page, we've got Cucumber, all about that BDD life behavior-driven development.
Which basically means you're writing tests that read like plain English. Anyone can understand them, ideally.
So it's kind of like bridging the gap between the techie folks and, well, everyone else.
That's the idea. It gets everyone on board with what's being tested and why.
Then there's TestNG, and this one seems way more, I don't know, developer-focused.
It's definitely a powerhouse for developers. Tons of features, really granular control, but yeah, you got to be comfortable with code.
So the million-dollar question, as always, is which one's right for, my project?
That's what we're here to figure out. We'll break down their strengths and weaknesses, show you some real-world examples.
Love that. So where do we even begin?
Let's start with TestNG. Get into the nitty-gritty of how it works.
Sounds good. Lead the way.
So TestNG, it's purely for testing, right? And specifically for Java. It can handle, like, everything. Unit tests, integration tests, system tests.
You name it. Sounds pretty comprehensive.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
If you need to test something in Java, TestNG's probably got you covered. And it works by using these things called annotations in your code.
Annotations?
Yeah, like little tags. So you write your code and then use annotations like @test to tell TestNG, hey, this is a test, run this.
I'm starting to get the picture. But it still seems pretty code heavy,
It is, which is why it's so popular with developers. If you're already writing Java code all day, TestNG just fits right in.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, how does Cucumber, with its BDD approach, contrast with all that?
Cucumber's all about Gherkin. It's this language, specifically for writing tests, but it's designed to be human readable.
So, like, plain English.
Pretty much. You'd write these scenarios using given, when, then. Like, given I'm on the login page, when I enter my username and password, then I should see the dashboard.
Wow, okay. That's actually super clear.
Right. And that's the point. Everyone can understand it. Developers, project managers, even the CEO could theoretically follow along.
So we've got TestNG for the hardcore coders and Cucumber, bridging the gap between business and code. But how different are they in practice?
Their whole philosophy is different to start. TestNG is all about the mechanics of testing. Cucumber's more about, like, specifying and documenting how the software should behave.
So TestNG is the how and Cucumber's the what.
You got it. And even the way they organize tests is different. TestNG uses these annotations to group tests together, prioritize them.
Whereas Cucumber's got these, like, feature files.
Yeah, each file is for a specific feature, like user login or shopping cart. And within those files, you have your scenarios.
Interesting. It's like they're structured differently to reflect their different approaches. Now, what about when it comes to data, like testing with different inputs and stuff?
Ah, yeah, that's key. So TestNG uses this thing called a data provider. You can basically create this table of data, different usernames, passwords, whatever, and feed that into your tests.
So you're not writing a separate test for every single combination?
Nope, way more efficient. And Cucumber handles this with scenario outlines and examples. Kind of the same idea, but a bit more visual.
Okay. So both can handle that kind of data-driven testing. But when it comes to actually choosing between TestNG and Cucumber, like, how do I know which one's right for me?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer, like always, is it depends.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
But seriously, if your team's all about Java, needs super complex tests, and you want total control, TestNG is probably the way to go.
So hardcore coders, TestNG's your jam.
Pretty much. But if you're all about BDD, collaboration is key, and you want documentation that everyone can understand, Cucumber might be a better fit.
Cucumber for the team players, then.
Yeah, and don't forget, you can always combine them. Use Cucumber's readability with TestNG's power underneath.
Best of both worlds. I like it. Now, I'm a visual learner, so to really get this, can we see some examples of what these actually look like in the real world?
Absolutely. Let's say you're testing a user registration flow. With TestNG, you'd have a class dedicated to that. And within that class, you'd have methods for each part of the process.
Like checking the email format, password strength, all that.
Yep. And you'd use those annotations we talked about, like at before class, to set up the environment before the tests run.
So that's where you'd like launch the browser and get to the registration page.
Exactly. Then each @test method would handle a specific piece of the registration process. And you can even group those tests together, maybe a smoke test group for the most basic ones.
Okay, so it's all very structured and organized. What about a Cucumber scenario? How would that look for the same registration flow?
So you'd have this feature file, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you'd start by describing the feature, like allow new users to register on the platform.
Setting the stage.
Exactly. Then you'd have a background section, stuff that's common to all the scenarios in that file, like given the application is running and I'm on the registration page.
Okay, so that's the starting point for each scenario.
Right. Then comes the actual scenarios themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, scenario, register with valid details. And then you use that given, when, then structure.
So something like, given I enter my name, email, and a strong password, when I click register, then I should see a success message.
Perfect. And you can use those scenario outlines and examples to test it with a bunch of different data.
Wow, it really is like telling a story, but in a way that actually tests the software. Crazy how TestNG and Cucumber can be so different, yet both aim to achieve the same thing.
It really shows you how many different ways there are to approach testing. And choosing the right approach is key to, actually having good tests that help you build better software.
That's what it's all about. Okay, I feel like we've got a good foundation here. We've seen TestNG and Cucumber in theory, seen some real-world examples.
We've even started to touch on how they differ in practice.
But performance matters too, right? Like how fast they are, how easy to maintain, all that stuff.
You're telling me that's where things get even more interesting.
All right, well, I'm ready to dive deeper.
Let's do it.
All right, so we left off talking about performance. Where do TestNG and Cucumber stand when it comes to, like, speed, setup, all that good stuff?
Well, let's start with setup, shall we? I mean, no one wants to spend hours just getting a framework up and running.
Especially if you're on a tight deadline, right? Every minute counts.
Totally. And in that sense, TestNG is usually quicker to set up.
Yeah.
Especially if you're already comfortable with Java.
Because it's all code-based, right?
Mm-hmm.
No extra layers to figure out.
Exactly. You can basically jump right in and start writing tests. Cucumber, on the other hand, well, it takes a bit more upfront work.
Because you have to define all those plain English steps and connect them to the code, right?
Yeah, you're essentially creating this whole layer of translation between the Gherkin language and the actual code. It's a bit more investment at the beginning.
But I guess, like we said before, that investment can pay off in the long run with better documentation and collaboration.
Oh, absolutely. It's like building a solid foundation. Might take a bit longer, but it'll be worth it in the end.
Okay, so setup, we've got TestNG winning on speed, Cucumber on long-term benefits. What about maintenance? Keeping those tests working as the software changes.
Yeah, that's key. And with TestNG, maintenance is usually pretty straightforward, especially for developers.
Because they're already working with the code all the time, right? Updating tests is just part of the flow.
Exactly. Cucumber, though, it can be a bit trickier. Maintaining those plain English scenarios, that's usually easy.
Yeah, those are pretty clear and concise.
But it's the step definitions, the code behind those scenarios, that can get messy, especially as your software grows and changes.
So it's like keeping those translations up to date can become a real chore.
It can, if you're not careful. You got to be really diligent about keeping those step definitions clean and organized.
So maintenance points to TestNG then?
I'd say so, generally speaking. But again, it depends on how well you structure your Cucumber project.
All right, last but not least, let's talk execution speed. How quickly do these tests actually run?
Well, raw speed, TestNG's got the edge. No surprise there.
Because it's running directly in Java, right? No extra processing.
Yep. Cucumber, with all its parsing and translating, it adds a little overhead.
But is that difference really noticeable in practice?
Honestly, in most cases, it's pretty negligible. Especially when you consider all the benefits Cucumber brings, like that collaboration and documentation we talked about.
So it's a trade-off, like everything else. Speed versus those other advantages.
Exactly. And choosing the right balance is key. It's not always about raw speed, but about what fits your team and your project best.
Okay, so we've talked about setup, maintenance, execution speed. I feel like we've got a pretty good handle on the performance side of things.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
But before we move on, I'm curious, are there any, advanced features in TestNG or Cucumber that we haven't touched on yet? Things that might sway the decision one way or the other?
Oh, there are tons. Way too many to get into in just one deep dive. But let's talk about a couple of big ones. Data-driven testing, for example.
Data-driven testing, what's that all about?
It's basically about running the same test, but with different inputs.
Yeah.
Like testing a login form with a bunch of different usernames and passwords.
So instead of writing a separate test for every single combination, you can just, feed in the data.
Exactly. Saves you tons of time and makes your tests more efficient. And both TestNG and Cucumber have really cool ways to handle this.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do they do it?
So TestNG has this thing called a data provider. You can think of it like creating a table of data where each row is a different set of inputs. And TestNG will automatically run your test with each row of data.
Wow, that's pretty slick. What about Cucumber?
Cucumber uses scenario outlines and examples. It's a bit more visual, but the idea is similar. You create a template for your scenario with placeholders for the data that will change.
And then you provide a table with the actual data.
Yep. So you might have a scenario outline for, like, user logs in with username and password. And then your examples table would have different combinations of usernames and passwords.
Ah, so it's kind of like filling in the blanks.
Exactly. Both approaches achieve the same thing, efficient data-driven testing, but in slightly different ways.
So both frameworks have got us covered there. Any other advanced features worth mentioning?
Well, how about parallel execution? This one's a real time saver, especially for large projects.
Parallel execution. You mean running multiple tests at the same time?
Yep, basically harnessing the power of your multi-core processor to speed things up. And TestNG has built-in support for this. You can configure it to run tests in parallel at different levels, the suite, test, class, even individual methods.
So you've got a lot of flexibility. What about Cucumber? Can it handle parallel execution too?
Not natively, like TestNG, but you can achieve it by integrating Cucumber with other tools, like Maven Surefire or JUnit.
Ah, so there are ways to make it work. It just takes a bit more effort.
Right. TestNG's built-in support for parallel execution is definitely a plus if speed is a major concern.
Okay, so we've got data-driven testing and parallel execution. Anything else we should know about before we move on?
One more thing, reporting. After you run your tests, you need to understand the results, right? Both frameworks offer different approaches here.
Yeah, that's crucial. What kind of reporting features do they have?
TestNG generates really detailed HTML reports right out of the box. You get information on which test passed, failed, skipped, how long they took, any exceptions. It's super helpful for debugging.
Sounds comprehensive. What about Cucumber's reporting?
Cucumber's built-in reporting is a bit more basic, focusing on the high-level view. You get a nice summary of the scenarios that ran and their outcomes.
But can you customize it, like add more details or integrate with other tools?
Oh, yeah. There are tons of third-party plugins and integrations available for Cucumber reporting. You can get really fancy if you want to.
Okay, so both frameworks have got us covered on the reporting front, too. Man, this is a lot to take in. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. Core philosophies, features, real-world examples, performance, advanced features.
We've barely scratched the surface, to be honest. But I think we've given our listeners a really good foundation for understanding TestNG and Cucumber.
Yeah, I'd say so. But at the end of the day, the question remains, which one's right for me? How do I make the decision?
Well, that's what we'll tackle in the final part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
All right, so we've explored the ins and outs of TestNG and Cucumber, seen their strengths and weaknesses, and even gotten a glimpse of some of their more advanced features.
It's been quite a journey. But now we're at the crossroads, right?
Exactly. We've got all this information, but the big question remains, how do we actually choose between TestNG and Cucumber? Is one objectively better than the other?
Well, if there's one thing we've learned in this deep dive, it's that there's no magic bullet, no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah, that's been pretty clear throughout our discussion.
TestNG and Cucumber, they each have their own sweet spot, their own set of strengths that make them shine in specific situations.
So it's all about finding the right tool for the job.
Precisely. And the right tool depends on a whole bunch of factors. Your project, your team, your priorities.
It's not just about the frameworks themselves, but about how they fit into the bigger picture.
Exactly. So, let's recap, shall we? TestNG, it's powerful, it's flexible, it's perfect for those complex testing scenarios where you need granular control.
And it's built for Java, so if that's your language, it just makes sense.
Right. Cucumber, on the other hand, it's all about collaboration, readability, that shared understanding between everyone on the team.
And those plain English scenarios, they're a game changer for making sure everyone's on the same page.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, you can even combine the two.
Yeah.
Use Cucumber for that high-level readability, and then leverage TestNG's power under the hood.
Ah, yes. The best of both worlds approach. Always a good option. So we've got TestG for the control freaks, Cucumber for the team players, and a hybrid approach for those who want it all.
I like that. But ultimately, the decision comes down to what works best for your specific context.
It's about understanding your needs, your priorities, and then choosing the framework or combination of frameworks that aligns with those. There's no single right answer.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. Testing is constantly evolving.
Oh, yeah. New tools, new technologies, new challenges all the time.
Exactly. So don't be afraid to experiment, to explore new frameworks, to constantly be learning and growing as testers.
It's all about staying ahead of the curve.
And remember, at the end of the day, testing is about delivering high-quality software that meets the needs of our users.
That's the ultimate goal. So whether you choose TestNG, Cucumber, or some other framework entirely, make sure it helps you achieve that goal.
That's what matters most. And with that, I think it's time to say goodbye. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of TestNG and Cucumber.
It's been a pleasure. Happy testing, everyone.